Welcome. In this lecture, we will talk about project planning and how to go from the project goals to the time plans. My name is Anna Järbrandt, and I'm an associate professor at the Department of Industrial Economics and Management. And we will have two parts of this lecture, from goals to time, and the second one will focus on how to create the time plans. So, in this lecture, we will focus on the issues that needs to be addressed when you as project managers are creating the time plan and the budget. So projects are temporary, unique assignments that needs to be executed within a certain time frame. And they also go through a life cycle. All projects do that. And these life cycles normally are presented within 4 different phases. So you can see it starts with an initiation phase, a planning phase, an execution phase, and a completion phase. So normally these are presented as 4 phases, sometimes 5. The point is that all projects do have a life cycle that they go through. One important aspect with these life cycles are that the expenditures vary during the phases. So you can see that in the initiation phase, the resource utilized are not so large and they're growing. Within the planning phase, they're growing even more. And during the execution phase, they have their maximum. While in the completion phase, they start fading off. Also, the level of activity within the projects vary between the different phases. So in the initiation phase, you can see that there will be start off with a lot of activities, but these are focused on specific issues. Then we go over to the planning phase, where there's other issues and other activities ongoing. While in the execution phase, there's also the maximum, again, level of activity, and also the maximum amount of people involved in the project. And in the closing phase, there's also a lot of activities that has to be completed in order for the knowledge to be gained and the projects to be terminated. Focusing on this life cycle, we will start talking about the first phase, the initiation phase. Within this phase, it's really, really important that you focus on both discussing the project goals, discussing the project objectives, and also discussing how to monitor the work that are going to be executed throughout the project. Within these early phases of the project lifecycle, it's very important to do a thorough planning and also a thorough discussion of what the project is supposed to execute. One of the project manager dilemmas actually occur within these phases, because early on in the project, in the early phases, you need to make all the important decisions, while the knowledge of what the project is actually going to accomplish is minimum, is the least. While in the end of the project, you will have all the knowledge of the results of the project since you're finished, but then the cost for changing will be at the maximum. So it's really, really expensive to make changes in the later stages of the project. So you can see that in the figure that we have ahead of us, that in the early phases, it's really important that you make good and thought through and also decisions that are anchored within the stakeholders, with all the stakeholders of the project, because in the end of the project, if you do changes there, it will cost you very, very much. So this lecture is supposed to discuss the issues that are focused in early stages in order to make the execution as smooth as possible. And just to emphasize, it doesn't matter if it's agile project management you're doing or if it's traditional sequential project management, because you always need to plan. So if you plan for the entire project, if you have a project management that is very sequentially based, that's one thing. Then you try to think that through the entire project. But if you work more agile, you also need to plan your sprints. And then you do these planning aspects from a sprint perspective. You need to think things through before you start executing. That's the point. So, starting with the project goal when you do your planning, it's really important to focus on the project goal, because project management actually consists of how to plan the project work, how to organize it in different ways, and how to control and follow up that is actually being done. But you're always working towards a project goal as a project manager. And these goals are mainly twofold. So you will have a project objective, which is very concrete and very fundamental for your project. And that is how you as project manager, has interpreted the performance of the project. Also, you will have an effect goal, which is actually what the project owner or the project sponsor is expecting the project to achieve. So your project owner and your project sponsor will have one aim of initiating this project and also making changes within, for instance, your organization or a product portfolio or something else. While you as a project manager will focus on the project objective, which, as I said, is the results coming out of the project. If you look on the project objective as a project manager, it's often emphasized as a triangle. And the reason for that is that you have 3 dimensions within the project objective, and these are time, cost, and performance/function. The reason for the triangle is the fact that no matter how you plan or how you think the project objectives are supposed to be, or you interpret it as a project manager, you will never be able to achieve maximum of all 3 of these. So you can never perform the best possible performance or function out of a project on the shortest amount of time on the lowest amount of cost. So you will have one of these dimensions will always be more important within your project, and you will always have to balance it. So that is one core issue for the initiation phase, to discuss how the project objectives, the different dimensions, should and could be balanced within the project. So if you look upon the iron triangle, as it's called, you can see that, for instance, a project focused on releasing the Olympic Games will have time as its main dimension. So you can't really push the deadline for that kind of project. You can't say we will initiate the Olympic Games a week later because we're not finished. If you get out of time, if the deadline is approaching, you will cut down on, for instance, performance or function. You will discuss how to make that lesser than planned, or you will let cost increase, take in, for instance, more resources. On the other hand, if you have a product development project, you will probably let the cost be the most important dimension, because you will have a budget that needs to be achieved. And in that way, you will discuss, can we release it, the new product, a bit later? Can it take a further, longer time? Or can we make the function diminish somehow? Can we make several releases, for instance, of the product? Again, the third type, if you have a performance project or a function project, for instance, if you're releasing something within a safety area, for instance, an airplane, you can't say that we will diminish the function, we will make it less safe because it has to be finished on time or on budget. You will let the other 2 dimensions be less important than function. You will always have the airplane needs to be safe at any cost or at any time. So the iron triangle for you as a project manager is useful to always remember. There's 3 dimensions within the project objectives. You need to make sure that all of these 3 dimensions are discussed, but you also need to make sure, as you can see in the next slide, that they are balanced. So the project focus will to balance these 3 and also to acknowledge that they might change during the life cycle again. So you will discuss this in the initiation phase with your project organization and your project team, and with your stakeholders and with your project owner and your project sponsor. And then you will be assured that yes, we will have a good balance within these 3 dimensions, and we know which dimension is most important if we need to make corrections during the projects. But you will also make sure that during this initiation phase, where you discuss the objectives, you will start off by saying, this is the function that we want to reach. And probably you will have a discussion that ends up saying, this is what we will do. And this is a perfect product. And then you will go to time, for instance, saying that, is there a deadline? Do we have to be finished on a certain time? Probably the answer is yes, because that's a core issue of projects. You know the plan dead in advance. So you're thinking, okay, can we acknowledge this? Can we manage to do all of this within this time frame? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. That will be a discussion. Then you will move on to cost. Is it possible to do all of this within this time plan, within this budget? And then you will continue, because the issue will be that, okay, maybe not enough money, maybe not enough time. And then you will go back to function, discussing that again, saying that can we do some things in another project? Can we have several releases that will be several projects? And then you can go back to time frame. Is the time plan better now? Is the budget better? That is the balance of the iron triangle. So when we talk about the project objectives, you have two memory rules you can use. One is that the project formulation should be SMART, and that's what you're aiming for. So it should be specified, measurable, accepted, realistic, and time limited. And it's very important that you try this out. When you're coming towards a formulation of the project objectives, with an emphasis on the 3 dimensions, you can always have the objectives in the 3 different dimensions. You, as a project manager, have the responsibility to check, is this SMART? Is it specified, measurable, accepted, realistic, and time limited? Because too many project objectives are actually dumb, as a memory rule. And that means that they are dreamy, unrealistic, motivating, and bold. And in a way, that works, again, for instance, for motivating people, encouraging them, emphasizing ideas that you have, but it doesn't work to actually get a good planning. So if you want to have a project that is motivating and bold and dreamy, let that be on a more holistic level, and then make sure that work again then more agile, have your sprints, and make sure that the planning of the sprints is smart, so that the work that you're executing in the group can actually work towards being more specified and measurable. So, to continue, before we go into the actual methods and tools on how to plan the project, all projects start by having an idea. And this idea is usually analyzed and discussed with a lot of other people. So that's how you include your stakeholders. But that is another lecture, Stakeholder Management. If the idea is found feasible, you can transform it into a project in this initiation phase. So it is the first phase of the life cycle where you take the ideas and transform them into something that is actually possible to start planning and then executing. It's really important as a project manager to keep the group in this phase and also in the planning phase, which we will discuss in another lecture, because it's very, very easy to start working. You want to feel that you're working, you're doing something. The discussions and the decisions made in this phase doesn't really make the group feel that they're doing something. So for a project manager, it's really important to remember, stay here, put enough effort in the first phase, because that will give you a shorter project's execution, actually. It will make the execution smoother. It's really important, the initiation phase, because the project manager and the group will share the same way of looking at the project. To understand why it's initiated, to understand the impact goal, for instance, that the project owner has. You have someone who's going to take the results and do something else within it. You can understand that as a group. It's really, really useful. And you will also create a group with the almost same expectations. And that is another important aspect when we talk about the team leadership and the management of the project group. How to create the same expectations, which is even more important in complex contexts and complex environments. So the output from the initiation phase will probably be sort of a basic business need of the project, and the project owner and the project sponsor will be the client of this, and you as project manager will be the one making sure that it happens. You will get a product or a performance description, and you will get a time plan and a budget. And these are all aspects that will help you to execute and command the project, actually. If we look on the planning process, which is one of the slides in the end of this lecture, I've been talking mainly about the first step, how to formulate the project objectives. The next lecture will be much more focused on how we're taking this concrete or not so concrete project objectives and project goals and turning them into a concrete time plan. So how to structure them and how to break them down into activities, how to identify if there's dependencies between them, set a logical order, and continue until we have the 3 documents that I talked about just recently that will help you to execute the project. So the next lecture will be about how to go from abstract goals to concrete activities and transform everything that's coming out of the initiation phase to something that you can use in the execution phase as a project manager.